Hello F-Team Transtastic, I'm Julian and it's Sunday and the topic of the week is how do we relate to our culture. So the thing is, Mexico is big AF. The culture is also pretty diverse. So saying just a solid answer like, yeah, I relate to my culture, or no, I don't relate to my culture, would be cutting it short. Mainly because the idea that foreigners have about Mexico or Mexican culture is not what I relate to. So to talk about my culture, I have to explain first where I come from. Yes, I'm from Mexico, but where and how is where I live. I think I look a little bit dark because of the whites in the image, but this is Mexico. It's Mexico. It's about the size of West Europe, and saying that, I mean, it's basically saying that there's one unified culture in Mexico. It's like saying that people in UK are exactly the same like people from Italy or people from Serbia. So yeah, no, it's not the case. There are many different kinds of people in here. And the reason why we still think that way, it has a lot to do with pre-Hispanic cultures, with colonization, with nationalism, and with the tend to centralize everything. That means that in Mexico, when we think about Mexican traditions, we almost exclusively think about traditions that are here in this bit, in the center, or more in the south. We already know the Aztecs and La Gran Tenochtitlan, the Mayans and Chichen Itza, that are more well known, at least for us. Like when we study history, we study that history, but we rarely talk about whatever happened in the north. Because at the time, while the Aztecs were building cities greater and much more advanced than the biggest metropolis on Europe at the time, people in the desert were not doing that. They were nomads. They only gathered food and they hunt. They didn't develop an agriculture, and they didn't settle, they didn't build settlements like the tribes and cultures from this bit did. I could go on for hours about this, about why we are so underrated in the north, in the desert, but that's not the point. I mean, I could literally make a thesis about that. I'm not gonna do that. That would take time. What I want to talk about is I have a different culture and I have a different life, and I see the things differently than people in the south, or what foreigners might think Mexico is, because they only think about what it is like in the south. I have the culture of the border, or at least being very close to the border. I don't live like right next to the US, but I do have the culture, or being in the north is the culture of being in the border, or being right there in the frontier, on a limit where nothing is. I mean, culturally and historically speaking, the frontier, the border is the limit, and is where nothing leaves. That's an imaginary construction, right, of things. I have the culture of the border. I have the culture of the border, or being very close to it at least. I have the culture of the border, or being very close to it at least, of the violence of the drug war that hits stronger and harder in the north, of cowboys and farms, and the landscape of a sierra and the desert. Cities in the north are much smaller and minds are closed. So being queer, it's hard, but it's hard everywhere. I still love this place all in all, through and through. So while a lot of people think of Mexican culture as this big as fiesta, and that is true, and these very close tight communities, and that is still true in here, I don't really have a lot to do, for example, with Day of the Death. The way we celebrate the Day of the Death where I live is very different than the way they celebrate it in the South, mainly because the people in cultures, because it's not something that had anything to do with the cultures of the desert, with the civilizations of the desert back in pre-Hispanic culture. It's like, it's a tradition that was not part of the civilizations over here. So the only reason that we do that in here still is nationalism, and the idea that we all have to do it because we are all Mexicans. But I celebrate it differently. My culture is the culture of the border, or being very close to it, at least, of the violence of the drug war that hit us stronger and harder where in the north than in the south, and of cowboys, because there were still cowboys in the desert, like cowboys live in the desert, and the landscape of La Sierra, but also desert and mountains. The cities in the north are much smaller and are further away from each other, so communities and people are more tight together, and the minds of these people are also very close, and I think that we have a macho culture that is stronger in the north, but really being queer in Mexico, it's hard everywhere. I still love where I live, and I feel part of it now, and I like it through and through.